Hello and welcome to this special bonus episode of the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name is Joel Sked and I am joined by Gary Cocker. Now, Gary thinks we're going to be speaking about Scotland's 1-0 win over Greece in Piraeus on Thursday night in the Nations League playoff.
Yes.
But like Chris Hansen, I've lured him here under false pretences. We're actually going to discuss each and every one of the 72 goals conceded by Dundee FC this season. So strap yourselves in.
How long do we have?
I know. That's what I was going to say. It would be a ludicrous idea for a podcast because it would likely surpass the lower league preview episode.
It's especially given the hour or two in the middle where you have to coax me back out of the corner and tell me to uncurl myself from the ball that I am currently in.
Yes, we're of course, we're not going to do that. We are, in fact, actually going to chat about Scotland and another impressive result for Steve Clarke's men. Entertaining game, I thought, and quite an intriguing performance considering there were two very, very different performances. So, there are two very, very different halves, I should say. And yeah, I suppose performances in that as well. So, Gary, jumping right back to the start, when the team got announced, there was a back four. Kieran Tierney was on the bench. How were you feeling when the announcement came out and Ralston was playing right back and Grant Hanley was in the middle of the pitch?
The eventual dividing line, the thing that will eventually kill off the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast, is the civil war that will erupt over the pro-Hanleyites in our midst and the anti-Hanleyites in our midst. And Joel, I am firmly on the anti-Grant Hanley bus. I do not rate the guy. I didn't rate him when he was playing regularly in the bottom-ish of the Premier League. So why would I rate him when he has played a collective 7 or 8 minutes for League One side Birmingham? When you've got a perfectly serviceable Scott McKenna on the bench who is playing La Liga, who is facing, I think Tom English had a piece after the game, which I don't think was doing what he meant it to do, which was reminding me of all the various incredibly quality centre forwards and wingers and creative players that Scott McKenna faces week in, week out for Las Palmas up against what feels like a semi-retired and more than lightly soiled Grant Hanley. So no, I wasn't particularly enamoured with that. Ralston, I'm sort of on the fence a little bit because I have no doubt that there's a better option for us at right back, but I know that Steve Clarke is very unlikely to trial a new option or relatively new option at any point in any of our qualifiers or crucial games like this playoff game. So I sort of expected to see Anthony Ralston play. I wasn't surprised, but I was saddened by Grant Hanley starting. But I'm sure that we're going to talk about him quite a bit more as the pod goes on.
Both of them will come on to talk about, and it's obviously difficult like further up the pitch because there was a few call-offs, like notably Ben Doak, who I think takes that system onto a different level with what he's able to provide. But there's definitely guys who play at a high level and gave Scotland that threat going forward. And I suppose when the game started, it was a case of team settling in and then growing into the game. And I thought as the game progressed, Scotland were definitely the team that just looked better and better, in terms of the first half.
Yeah, I was really surprised actually by just how sort of positive and forward-looking Scotland were, because I tuned into the game and obviously it finished 1-0 to the good guys in the end. But it unfolded in a very different manner to the manner I was expecting. I thought that we would be set up to be incredibly stodgy and maybe look to hit Greece on the counter. But we actually really took the game to Greece. And I think what you could see as well is that for all that we've spoken about so far, our own doubts over our own defence, Greece's defence looked so shaky. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but certainly after we opened the scoring, there were 2 or 3 gilt-edged chances that came our way that didn't necessarily come our way through any terrific incisive play of our own. It came because Greece's keeper decided to just take the law into his own hands in a very, very foolish way on a couple of occasions. So it was quite exciting. I think the one feeling I had at the end of the first half, and I appreciate we'll come back to speak about the penalty and about other chances, was I had a little bit of a fear that because we hadn't taken more of what was presented to us, that we'd come to regret that. And thankfully we didn't, but it did feel like if we'd just been a little bit more clinical, or if the bounce of the ball just gone the right way for us, then we could not only be out of sight on the night, but potentially be out of sight over the course of the 2 legs.
Yeah, and I think that was probably the biggest criticism of the first half was we got into good areas and we looked threatening going forward, but we didn't threaten enough for the opportunities we had. For example, you mentioned Che Adams should have scored, and that was presented to us. And then there was one where Gilmore got in the box, and then was a chance where Che Adams flashed a shot just past the far post. But for all like the good that Scotland did in terms of winning the ball back and then getting into dangerous areas and looking like we were on the verge of doing something, we probably didn't do enough with the territory that we created, or the opportunities that we created, and the Greek goalkeeper didn't have too much to do with like you wanted him to have to do a lot more or be busier, and they picked the ball at the back of the net, and thinking the Che Adams shot, which again you go back to the 2 Che Adams efforts, I think he saw the best and worst of Che Adams in a Scotland jersey last night, especially first half, is in that he is good in general play, building up. He's quick. He gives you an option from quicker than other options. But he can give you an option wider. He can run the channels. He makes good runs. He can drop deep. He's kind of all round in that aspect, but he just doesn't have the kind of killer instinct in a Scotland jersey. He's not been that. For example, you compare him to Lyndon Dykes, and there's times Che Adams is the better player, Dykes comes up with the bigger moments, and that just seems to be lacking throughout Che Adams' time as a Scotland international.
Yeah, and I think the perennial struggle that Steve Clarke has had is finding a reliable number 9 that he can go with that offers it all. But then, what nations do? I mean, even if you have a look at the starting lineups of a couple of the really elite sides, like I think Germany and Italy last night, they had strikers that you've heard of, but you're not exactly going to feel entirely threatened by. I think Germany brought on a striker that plays for Borussia Mönchengladbach and is a sort of 30-year-old journeyman. So there is almost a worldwide shortage of that number 9 that in the late 90s, early 2000s, you couldn't get enough of. And I think that leaping slightly ahead, George Hirst didn't do a lot to suggest that he would be the option. Now, it's very harsh to say that, given it's his debut. It's a very tricky away tie that he's been put into, where it's not as if he's going to be getting a lot of chances to be on the ball anyway. A lot of the work that he's going to have to be doing is going to be off the ball, pressing and harrying, and then chasing the ball down into channels. But there wasn't a massive amount there to suggest that would, that the shirt was there for him to grab. I would have been interested, as I'm sure you definitely would have been interested, to see what would have happened if Wilson had been given a go. But that's not going to happen.
Selfishly, I was like, don't bring him on just today. Leave it till Sunday, because I didn't want to have to do more work last night. So I was fine with him not going on. But Jade, you mentioned Hirst. A member of our group chat put in, they could have stuck me up front and I've done as much as Hirst. And the person who said this is probably the person in our group chat, in the tennis group chat, that is the last person I would want up front for Scotland if you had to choose anyone from who was Scottish or who has someone born in a grandparent born in Scotland. Now, you mentioned it earlier on, the penalty. There's obviously been a fair bit of debate about it. And didn't think it was a penalty when the incident occurred, so I was surprised when the ref, we'll come on to talk about him, I thought he was brilliant, the ref pointed at the spot. And then even after the replays, and I know it's kind of split opinion, but I still don't see it as a penalty, just because I think it's a weird one, because like McTominay's, he's like stepping in a different direction, and the Greek boy coming in, I don't think it was a natural step for McTominay, and then I think that surprised the Greek boy, because I don't think when he was coming in, he was expecting McTominay's foot where it was to be there. So yeah, it was an awkward one. I can see why people have said it's a red apparently, but not for me.
Yeah, it did seem soft to me. I did think, and there was someone in our group chat that immediately made me question my entire knowledge of football. But I thought the challenge on Gilmour, which was maybe 5 to 10 minutes later, that to me struck me, at least on first glance, as being much more of a sort of solid penalty shout.
Yeah, I get that,
because it seemed to be a hand in the back just as he was playing up to shoot. So yeah, there were various points last night when it felt like we were riding our luck, but then there's so many points over the course of following Scotland that you can point to where we did not ride our luck, and where luck rode us instead. So I'll take it, but I mean, the penalty was dispatched brilliantly by Scott McTominay, who I think is now, trying to remember this, I think he's now, it's either 2 or 4 goals, I appreciate there's a big difference between the two, of being one of the top 10 scorers of all time for Scotland.
Have you been reading Scotland Coefficients newsletter?
Yes, I have. Yes. I have subscribed to Scotland's Coefficient Substack, because I will be mercilessly stealing those little nuggets for podcasts. But that's the sort of statistic that just blows your mind, because it feels to me like he only started scoring for Scotland last year.
The Spain game.
And he's just absolutely, he's just become a relentless machine since then. Okay, it's a penalty, so you've got a 3 and 4 chance of scoring it, but still.
It's I know international football's changed and there's more games, but with McTominay, what surprised me more than his goal, so he's on 12, Mo Johnson's on 14, so you would expect him to get into the top 10. The way he scores and plays for Scotland is you would expect him to do that before the end of the calendar year. But it's the fact that he's on 58 caps. Yeah. And it doesn't seem that long ago that he started playing for Scotland. I think he's 7 years ago now. It doesn't feel that long ago. So yeah, the great thing about the Scotland side is that there is. Can you have this? I mean, this is a football cliches discussion. Can you have more than one talisman? Because it feels like they're in the Scotland squad, and just on McTominay and a couple of others, there's guys who are kind of just talismanic figures when they pull on that shirt.
Yeah, it feels to me like there's I think the next step up from talisman, I think, is if you have more than one talisman, I think you have a spine.
That's right, okay.
Or that's what I'm going with anyway, because obviously, when you see that McTominay and Gilmour are playing, and then John Souttar as well, for me, is, I was, as much as I was not that happy to see Hanley's name down, I just feel like John Souttar he's the one element of that defence, because I think if you look across the rest of the backline, we've discussed Hanley, we've discussed Ralston, Andy Robertson is clearly, he's maybe not in the twilight of his career, but dusk is beginning to appear over the hills.
He's on the other end of the top of the hill.
Yeah, he's beginning to very gently roll down the way. But no, there's now what is appreciated about the Scotland side for me is that you do feel like, for better or worse, you can pick 8, 9 of the starting 11, all things being equal with who's actually available. And hopefully over the next couple of years, as more people get blooded in to the side, those who we perhaps don't rate as much become squad players rather than starting 11 players. I mean, we've already mentioned Scotland's Coefficients Substack, which is really good. And part of the article that you must have read as well is the Roll of Honour and who's on it. And if you look through the players that are on that, obviously Andy Robertson's on it. I think last night he went up to outright third, and Gordon was joint fourth, I think. So you imagine he'll be outright fourth after Sunday's game. But obviously you've got John McGinn on there, you've got Scott McTominay's on there, Grant Hanley is on there as well. But you can really see that there's a solid core of players, at least for the next couple of years, who already have so much international experience. And that, I think, was definitely brought to bear in the second half last night, when, as much as we've critiqued Grant Hanley, not on the basis of too much evidence, admittedly, you could see the sort of the meat and potatoes that he can deal with, which is just when crosses are coming into the box from some teenage ingenue that I certainly hadn't heard of before. He was dealing with all of them, or most of them at least.
Yeah, and I think it's a good way to move on to the second half, because just in terms of the first half, Greece, I wasn't overly impressed with Greece.
No.
You heard a wee bit about them. They're going to be in our World Cup qualifier. I was like, I was watching them. I was like, if this is what they've got to offer, we can be looking at 6 points in our group. And that they played the game. I couldn't decide if they were playing the game as if they had 10 men, or they were playing the game, it was like the last 10 minutes and chasing it. But they just felt quite disjointed, especially when they lost the ball in Hearts. Whoa, Scotland had to force a Hearts mention in here somewhere. Scotland were, and then Scotland were able to break forward. But I never felt we were under any trouble when they got into the final third. They moved the ball wide, and then it seemed like they just ran out of ideas when they got in there. Their striker, probably should have looked into this before, but they've got a striker who's got a very good record in place for Benfica, who's on the bench, and they had some boy from Panathinaikos playing up front, and he didn't really seem to get into it. And you can both criticise the Greek attack, but also just as a defensive unit, thought Scotland played were good in the first half. Grant Hanley had a couple of moments where he looked shaky, and we'll come on to an incident in the second half. But Ralston, was really impressed with him. Okay, he's not going to be a creative fullback, and he's not going to give you probably too much in the final third. But defensively, I thought he was strong, and he used the ball relatively well. John Suter, agree with everything you said, and then Robertson just solid, and I mean Craig Gordon had little to do. Before we move on to the first half, we do have to mention, and glad Tony brought this up in the chat, is Grant Hanley, Anthony Ralston's, Tony Ralston's curtains. I'm sorry, you need to get rid of those, Tony, because they do not suit you.
No, and obviously McTominay's got them too, but he's living in Naples, and
he's an attacker. He's played for Man United. He's a strapping guy. Whereas Ralston, I'm not critiquing other people's hair when I've got a cap covering mine, but what's left of it. But it was it's you're looking at him, and it's like it makes him look softer.
But you know what, Joe? Whatever he has to do to his hair to perform competently at right back for Scotland is fine by me. If it fools the Greeks into thinking that he's another unknown right back, then perfectly fine. I'll deal with that.
So the second, moving on to the second half, and I was going to try and bring up a FOTMob graphic from it, but I don't know how to present on Riverside. So anyway, the stats from first half to the second half really painted the picture. So Scotland had 51% in the first half, XG of 1.38, shots 7, and those big chances 2. Greece were 0.34 XG, 0 shots on target, and then you get to the second half. Greece 68% possession, 2.4 XG, 18 shots, but only one on target. Scotland offered very little going forward and as an attacking threat, and it was one way traffic. How did you feel? Because for a long time I was thinking, well, a goal's inevitable, especially with the young boy that came off the bench, 17-year-old, I think he is, who looks really impressive. Because there was a part of me thinking a Greece goal's inevitable, and then there was a moment, I can't pinpoint it, in the second half where I just thought, these guys are never going to score. I'm quite happy, quite comfortable with what Scotland are doing.
It reminded me, and you've already shoehorned in Hearts, so let me shoehorn in Dundee putting 4 past Dundee United. But it did remind me of when it was 3-2 at Tannadice. Mm-hmm. And there's the nerves that you just always have, but then there's the sort of the other part of your brain that's actually assessing, are they going to score? Is it a matter of time? I never really felt that way, but I think that was really solidified with I think it was Cholis took a shot which Suter, he deflected it with his legs, and thankfully the deflection went across goal but out for a corner rather than nestling in the bottom of the net.
Yeah.
And as you say, it just, as I was watching, I just thought, this is how I used to feel watching Scotland at home up against Liechtenstein or Kazakhstan or something, where just nothing is coming off for us, and frustratingly, we're not scoring here.
Yeah.
And it absolutely felt that way. Obviously, Greece had the goal chalked off from the corner, which the ball had gone over the line, and it had gone well over the line.
Yeah.
There was a slight concern on my part when they were checking by VAR, because as we know, if any part of the ball is on the line, then the goal counts, and it does not need to be much. And the angles can sometimes be a little unclear. But thankfully that was ruled out, and then there was the chance, the cross that came in. I can't remember if Chalice was still on. I think he was, and it was he and Ralston challenging for the ball. I think Ralston did enough to put him off, and he put it onto the post rather than when it looked easier to score, as Liam McLeod said on commentary. But those were the only heart and mouth moments. But even then, there was never a point when I thought to myself, we were really under the cosh here. I recognised that Greece had the ball, but it just didn't feel like they were doing anything with it, and the stats still bear that out. As well as you say, only one shot on target. I think they were unleashing them from anywhere they could, and obviously they had two late chances gifted by defenders of ours to really put the pressure on, but again, those came to nothing.
There was, when you talked about the only heart and mouth moments, I think the other heart and mouth moment was Grant Hanley bringing down a boy on the edge of the box, and that's where you're just looking. He's like, he's had moments recently. What was the penalty he gave away at Hampden? Who was it against? Potentially Portugal. Honestly, my short-term memory is diabolical, but it was just like, it's almost like he goes through the game and then he just has a mind blank, or he's like, has moments where he's just not aware of what's around him, and he's just like, right, I've decided I'm going to do this, that I'm going to make this challenge or go into this tackle without assessing the situation. And you saw it in the first half where there was a long ball and the Greek boy came round his kind of blind side to get goal side of him, and it's just like that needs to tighten up, especially in World Cup qualifiers if we're playing against Portugal or whoever. Got away with it, and over the piece he was absolutely fine, but it's those moments that can come back to bite you.
Yeah, and it's exactly the same with Ryan Porteous, who I'm sure we'll come to talk about too, which is, I don't think anyone's denying that either of them can be a perfectly serviceable international defender for 95% of the time, but it's the decision-making that they make in those crucial moments is the thing that can totally undo us. And obviously with Porteous, it was the opening game against Germany, when that just, going down to 10 men and going, was that 3-0 behind in the Euros? Can't remember, but it totally put the nail in our coffin. And last night, were it not for VAR, it was clearly outside the box that the foul took place, but it was a totally unnecessary foul. It's not as if the Greek player was sort of streaking into the box with no one else there, and Hanley saw it as the only thing to do to prevent a likely or a probable goal. It was a crowded penalty box with plenty of bodies in it, and he was pretty tight to him, and he just took him out, and it was baffling. And obviously for my agenda and yours, it's not preferable that it was a free kick rather than a penalty, but for Scotland overall, it's better that it was a free kick, which was just hammered against the wall. So
I've got to say, I've not got any agenda against Grant Hanley. Would I? I think he's been, like you said, like serviceable. He's been a good professional for Scotland. I just it's just curious. So you've got a guy who's playing week in, week out in La Liga. But again, I'm not watching Scott McKenna in La Liga, nor am I watching Grant Hanley. I don't think he's even playing in the League One. But it's one of those where we've seen it in the past. Clark likes someone, trust them, and then will put his faith in them. In terms of Porteous, I know it. So he conceded the free kick late on. I looked at free kick at the time, and then you seen it, and he actually got a decent toe on the ball. Whereas you kind of feel sympathy there, and you just wonder maybe whether he needed to dive in, maybe just show him down the line or whatever. But the challenge in the other half, that was just funny. That was just outright just. I was going to I'm going to make my presence felt, and he certainly did so.
And there's been some interesting responses to what was a tweet sent in genuine affection for Ryan Porteous last night, and some people took it as us casting slights on him, which in a way I suppose we were, but also it is what he's going to do, and he is now old enough. I think when he was still at Hibs, he was obviously young enough that there was an argument that that part of his game that'll smooth out as he gets older, and it's not. But then if it did smooth out, he wouldn't be the defender that he is, and he clearly does have something to offer. But I will just permanently have my heart in my mouth when he is on the pitch, because I don't think he makes massive. He doesn't make massive errors he makes massive errors of judgment in terms of his tackling, but not in terms of his decision making and how he uses the ball, which I suppose is something that you can work on.
I suppose to finish up, is there anything or anyone else that you think is worthwhile bringing up and mentioning?
Nothing. I think obviously we've mentioned Hirst coming on for his debut. I think it'll be interesting to see on Sunday. I'm guessing it's going to be pretty much the same starting 11 at home. Maybe a slight tweak. We obviously got away a little bit with, we had, was it seven of the starting 11 were on yellows, as in if they got a further yellow card they would miss Sunday's game, and none of them picked one up. I think Lewis Ferguson was the only player of ours to pick up a booking, and he's not on anything from the qualifying campaign. So yeah, it feels like we rode our luck quite a bit, but ultimately you get good luck if you're a good team, and I think this is a genuinely good Scotland team, and if we can unearth or develop decent attacking options and find a goalkeeper who's not approaching his mid-40s that we can rely on in goal, then we'll be laughing.
I just think, speaking about this, I think it was Sean a couple of weeks ago, or just asked a question, was like, when was the last time? I don't know, it's Scotland, this is not the only Scotland, not the only nation who've suffered by this, but when was the last time Scotland were able to put out or Steve Clarke was able to put out his strongest 11? Yeah. That's I think that's the frustration, and I think that's what we've seen. We've seen over the last couple of years. We've seen it at the Euros where if you are missing one or two, there are areas where you're more happy for players to be missing than certain other areas. But if you get hurt in certain, or players not available in certain areas, well, it's like wide now with Ben Doker right back, then there is a kind of sizable drop, or if it's whether it's personnel or the way that the team can attack or play. But to go to Greece and get the result that we did, playing the two different ways that we did, was really impressive. Gilmour, I continue first half certainly continue to enjoy watching him a lot. I mean, there was a couple of passes where he didn't get it quite right early on, but then found his feet, and he's just his ability to change the tempo, his ability to play long and short. When you have someone like that playing in the position he does, who doesn't just go for short passes all the time, who is capable of switching play and going further forward. We've seen it with the goal as well. Even with himself driving it forward, it's just completely it's just transformative to what you can do in midfield. So yeah, again, always enjoy watching him. And just finally, I suppose, puts us in a good position for Sunday, and probably confidence-wise more so if we complete the job on Sunday. Confidence-wise going into the World Cup qualifiers?
Hugely. I mean, it's Belarus, Greece, and the losers of Denmark, Portugal, and that finished 1-0 in Copenhagen to Denmark last night. So they've got the advantage, but you would think that Portugal would do something on Sunday, which hopefully will mean it's Denmark, Greece, and Belarus. And I think we've won away. We've won away against the Greeks. So you would hope that puts us in a really good position. And I think that if we do stay in, I can't remember the exact sort of probabilities or outcomes of this, but I think if we do stay in the sort of the A band of the Nations League, then that's a huge boost for Euro 2028, just in terms of having that fallback of playoffs in the way that we've not really benefited from being in it this time around. But if we manage to stay in it, then it'll be a huge benefit to us. But as you say, the confidence will be huge, particularly given that we were missing Doak, who's been a huge talisman for us lately. And I think if the squad and the country realise that, you know, we don't have to hang our hat on everything a la England with Rooney's metatarsal, that, you know, we have a panoply of options that we can utilise. And the missing piece of the jigsaw is undoubtedly getting 33-year-old Simon Murray up top for Scotland. And once we do that, Scotland's top goal scorer at the moment in the top tier, then, you know, Steve Clarke will never look back.
I wouldn't be against him coming off the bench rather than George Hirst last on Thursday night. And I think what's look wide at the bigger picture is you look at question marks around Steve Clarke last year, because our form was really, really poor. It was beating Gibraltar over kind of a large period, and you go back to Euros and that failure, but to now have beaten Poland away, Greece away, and then Croatia at home, drawn with Portugal as well. So to have that run of 4 results is really big, and it can give us a lot of confidence going into Sunday. And then you've got the summer friendlies. I think it's just friendlies in the summer where you can maybe experiment a bit more ahead of the World Cup qualifiers starting next season, where you're looking at if we can add to the team that started against Greece, add Aaron Hickey, add Ben Doak, then it just takes that team up another notch, and one that should be very competitive qualifying for the World Cup. But Gary, we will leave it there. We said you wanted to be there in half an hour. We were just over that, but we got there. We got there. I appreciate that, and I think this is going on YouTube and on just a bonus pod. So be sure to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Terrace Podcast. I think it's loads and loads of content going up there. Fowler and I recorded a top 10 goalkeepers list on Thursday before the Scotland game, and that was interesting, because the goalkeeper, there's not a lot of good goalkeepers in the Scottish Premiership.
No, he came out to all of us to ask us to provide our top 10, and I think everyone, once you got beyond the top 4, was struggling. And
just throwing names up in the air.
Any combination I gave was deeply embarrassing. So I just did what everyone does and put your own club keeper far higher than he should be. Yeah,
you felt ashamed to be typing it out, but but please be sure to listen to that, and then we'll be back on. I think we'll be back on Sunday. I said to Phil that I'd be able to do a podcast after the game at Hampden Park. I think it's a 5:00 kickoff at Hampden Park. So hopefully we are talking about another Scotland win, and hopefully everyone enjoys their weekend, including you, Gary. Goodbye. Now you can stop recording.